Sir, I can see in your eyes that you've carried something for a long time. You don't have to hide it here. Your Honor, some battles don't end when the war is over.
The courtroom was silent when the old man began unbuttoning his coat. No one expected anything unusual. People run red lights every day. Fines get issued, cases get closed, everyone goes home. But when 83-year-old Colonel Raymond Hale revealed what he carried beneath that worn, weather-faded jacket, the entire room froze. Not because of medals, though he had earned more than most soldiers could count. Not because of scars, though time had carved its history into his skin. But because, right there, pressed against his heart, was a tattoo so old the ink had begun to blur. A military unit crest circled by the Latin motto of his battalion, and beneath it, a date. A date carved into his flesh decades ago. A date that marked the morning 24 men under his command never came home. His hands didn't shake because of age. They shook because he still felt the weight of those lives. 40 years of carrying a battlefield inside his chest. 40 years of driving the same route on the same day to honor the fallen. And on this morning, when his engine stalled and time slipped away, he chose speed over caution. He broke the law, yes, but he did so trying not to break a promise. When Judge Caprio saw that tattoo, he didn't see a violation. He saw grief. He saw duty. He saw a man who never stopped serving. And in that moment, Judge Caprio slowly rose from his seat, placed his hand over his heart, and rendered a salute that no words could match. Subscribe to Real Judge Stories and comment if you believe some debts can only be honored, never repaid. What happened next was not written in any courtroom procedure, and it's not something you'll find in legal textbooks or training manuals. Because sometimes the law pauses to remember the weight of sacrifice. This is not the story of a traffic violation. It is the story of a promise kept for 4 decades, a burden carried alone, and the moment an entire courtroom finally understood why. And it begins on a quiet Thursday morning. It was a gray morning in Providence, the kind where the sky hung low and the air felt heavy with the weight of unfinished stories. Inside Courtroom B, the usual shuffle of paperwork and murmured conversations filled the space. A row of wooden benches creaked as people settled in, waiting for their turn, their fines, their explanations. The bailiff's voice echoed as he called each case, steady and practiced, like a drum keeping time. Judge Caprio sat with his familiar calm, reading over forms and listening with the patience of a man who has seen not just mistakes, but the lives behind them. The camera at the back of the room blinked quietly, recording everything just as it always did. Then the bailiff called the next name, Case 14-872, Colonel Raymond Hale. The room didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. He rose from the bench with the steady deliberation of a man who had learned to respect every movement life allows. Colonel Raymond Hale was not tall anymore. Time has a way of borrowing inches from even the strongest, but there was something unmistakable about the way he carried himself. His spine, though curved with age, still tried to stand straight. His chin, though softened, still lifted with quiet dignity. Even his steps, slow and measured, kept the rhythm of years spent commanding attention without ever needing to ask for it. His shoes were polished, not in the bright mirror shine of ceremony but in the careful way of someone who still believes respect begins with the smallest details. His coat was worn at the elbows, the fabric thinning from decades of use, not fashion. Every thread seemed to hold memory. On his left breast pocket, a small, faded pin, the emblem of his old Ranger battalion, was fixed in place. Not flashy. Not meant to impress. Just a truth he never removed. He approached the podium and placed both hands on its edge, not to steady himself physically, but as though grounding himself for something heavier than words. He did not look afraid. He did not look angry. He simply looked like a man who had lived a long time with something that had never left him. Judge Caprio lifted his eyes. 2 men who understood weight, though in different forms, now faced one another. Judge Caprio looked up from the citation, his expression shifting the moment he saw the man standing before him. Respect isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's simply recognized. And in that instant, something in Colonel Hale's posture, his bearing, the quiet discipline in the way he stood, told the judge exactly who this man once was, and still was. "Good morning, sir," Judge Caprio said, his tone warmer than the one he used in most cases. "Please state your name for the record." "Colonel Raymond Hale, United States Army, retired, Your Honor." His voice carried the gravel of age but the steadiness of command. Not loud. Not prideful. Just true. Judge Caprio nodded, almost as though the title itself required acknowledgement. "Thank you for your service, Colonel. Please, at ease." The words weren't spoken as courtesy. They were spoken as understanding. He glanced down again at the citation. You are charged with failing to stop at a red light on Elmwood Avenue, recorded by traffic camera at 9:42 a.m. Do you recall the incident? Yes, Your Honor. I do. No excuses. No hesitation. Just acceptance. The kind that comes from someone who has carried accountability a long time. And were you in a hurry for any particular reason? Colonel Hale's eyes lowered, not in shame but in memory. Yes, sir, he said quietly. There was someplace I needed to be. I was late. The room leaned closer without moving. Colonel Hale drew in a slow breath before speaking, as though choosing each word with the same care a soldier might use when handling something fragile. I woke up early that morning, Your Honor. Earlier than usual. I laid out my uniform same as I do every year on this date. I keep it cleaned and pressed, though I rarely wear it. Only once a year, in fact. He paused. The anniversary of an operation I was part of a long time ago. No one in the courtroom moved. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter. I went to place flowers, he continued, at the memorial grounds outside the old airfield. I go every year. I have for 41 years. I visit the men I served with. His voice didn't crack, but it tightened just enough to feel. Judge Caprio nodded gently. Were you running late for that visit? Yes, Your Honor. His hands tightened on the podium. My car, I've kept the same vehicle for decades, you see, wouldn't start this morning. Battery gave out. Took time to get a jump. More time than I could afford if I wanted to be there at the hour. He exhaled, slow and uneven. I've never missed the time. Not once. Not in all those years. So, the judge said softly, you accelerated to make the light. Yes, sir. I saw it turning yellow. And I pressed the gas. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was dangerous. And I accept that. His eyes lifted and the room felt the weight of what sat behind them. But I could not be late. Not today. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was reverence. Colonel Hale seemed to gaze past the courtroom walls, as though what he needed to say could only be seen somewhere far away, in memory, not in language. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Softer. Heavier. Not weaker but weighted. It was 1982, he began. My last deployment. I was the commanding officer of an airborne infantry company. I trained those men myself. I knew their voices, their tempers, their laughs. I knew who sang off-key during drills and who tried to hide extra rations when they thought I wasn't looking. A faint, sad smile crossed his face, the kind that remembers warmth while standing in the cold. They were young. Most of them. Just boys, really. But they were good. Brave. Loyal. The kind of men who'd carry each other before they carried themselves. The room listened like a single, breathing thing. We were sent into a situation that went wrong fast. Intelligence was incomplete. Communication lines broke down. And decisions had to be made in seconds, not minutes. His hands tightened slightly on the podium, knuckles pale. I gave an order, he continued. One I believed, one I still believe, was the right one in that moment. But it meant dividing our forces. It meant trusting that every man could hold where he stood. He swallowed and the sound felt loud. Some came home. Some didn't. He didn't list names. He didn't need to. They weren't just soldiers to me, he said quietly. They were my responsibility. Every one of them. Their safety. Their lives. Their return. His voice thinned like a rope pulled too tight. And when they didn't come home, that responsibility didn't end. It didn't disappear. It became something I carried. Every day. Every year. Every November. A tear slipped down a woman's cheek in the gallery. Colonel Hale didn't notice. His eyes were somewhere else entirely. Judge Caprio sat quietly for a moment, giving the colonel space to breathe. Then gently he asked, Colonel, may I ask something? You visited those men every year for 41 years. Why is it so important that you never arrive late? Why that time? Colonel Hale didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up and slowly unfastened the top button of his coat. The room shifted, a ripple of stillness like air holding its breath. The bailiff took a step forward, uncertain. But Judge Caprio raised a hand, stopping him. The colonel continued. One button. Then another. His hands trembled, but not from weakness. From memory. Underneath, he wore his old service dress shirt, faded, the olive fabric softened by time. He unbuttoned that too, just enough for the courtroom to see what lay beneath his undershirt. And then, with a slow, reverent movement, he pulled the fabric aside. Gasps broke the silence. There, pressed into the skin over his heart, was a tattoo worn by decades of sun and sweat and grief. The ink was blurred in places, but its shape was unmistakable. The crest of his battalion, an eagle clutching a broken shield. Below it, in precise block letters, a date. October 17, 1982. Somewhere behind the date, beneath years of healing and recollection, was pain that had never closed. That was the day we lost them, he said, voice thin but steady. The day I gave the order that sent those men forward. The day they didn't come back. He touched the tattoo with 2 fingers, not to show it but because that is simply where his hand always went when he spoke of them. I had this done the week after the funerals. So I would never forget. So I would never allow myself to move on. Because moving on felt like leaving them behind. The courtroom did not breathe. Nobody asked me to do this. Nobody told me to visit their memorials. But I made them a promise. I told them I would stand with them, even after time took everything else. He looked up at Judge Caprio, eyes shining but unbroken. I ran that light because I was late to mourn my own family. Colonel Hale's eyes were no longer in the courtroom. They were somewhere far away, across years, across oceans, across the space between memory and regret. It was supposed to be a short operation, he began. In and out. Secure the airfield, stabilize the area, protect the civilians who had been caught in the middle. He exhaled slowly as though the air itself carried weight. We had trained for missions like this. We were rangers. Efficient. Disciplined. Ready. The room listened motionless. We deployed before sunrise, he continued. The air was so still you could hear the blades of the helicopters before you saw them. The men were quiet but not afraid. They trusted their training. They trusted each other. And they trusted me. His jaw tightened. When we landed, it was chaos. We were fired on immediately. Positioning was wrong. We were more exposed than we'd been led to believe. The terrain was uneven. Civilians were being used as shields near the control building. Communications were patchy. The left flank couldn't relay status. And the right flank. He stopped. Pause. Not for drama. For pain. The right flank was where we lost our first man, he said quietly. Private Ellison. He was 19. Always joking. Always humming some old country tune. One shot. Cling. Quick. He didn't even hit the ground before we knew. The judge's eyes lowered. I sent second squad to reinforce the right side. I sent first squad to push toward the tower. But third squad was pinned behind broken vehicles, completely exposed. If they stayed, they'd be overrun. If they moved, they'd take fire. He swallowed. I made the call. I ordered third squad to advance across open ground. It was the only way to support the others. It was the only chance we had to stabilize the field. And then, barely audible. They didn't make it. No one in the courtroom spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of ghosts, of echoes, of weight. They didn't question me, the colonel said. Not one of them. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask if I was sure. They didn't look back. His hands were shaking now. They trusted me. And I sent them into fire. He wasn't crying. But the room was. We secured the airfield, he said. The mission was marked successful. Lives were saved. Territory was held. Command congratulated us. They called it decisive action. He shook his head, slow, aching. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt responsible. The tattoo on his chest sat like a brand. They gave me a medal for it, he said. Pinned it right here. He tapped his chest where the tattoo rested. I accepted it. Because my men would have stood at attention for theirs. But afterward, I went to the memorial wall. I put my hand on their names. A breath. I told them I was sorry. No theatrics. No collapse. Just truth, unvarnished and heavy. That day never ended, he finished. Not for me. Every year I go back. To remember. To honor. To stand where they cannot. That is why I could not be late. He looked up at Judge Caprio again. I have carried them longer than I carried my rifle. Colonel Hale drew a long, steady breath, as if returning from somewhere only memory could reach. After I came home, he said softly, I made a decision I never spoke aloud. Not to family. Not to friends. Not even to the army chaplain who tried to help me make peace with it. He paused, eyes focused on the wood grain of the podium. Every year, on the anniversary of the operation, I visit the memorial site. At the exact time the first shot was fired. Not an hour later. Not 10 minutes later. The exact time. The room leaned into the stillness. I stand at attention, he continued, in full uniform. I bring flowers. Not the same ones each year but always fresh. Always chosen with care. I place them beneath the marker where their names are engraved. And I speak to them. He didn't blink as he said it. I tell them that I remember. That I have not forgotten. That as long as I am breathing, they are still marching beside me. His hand shifted to his chest, to the faded emblem tattooed there. Some people heal by letting go, he said. But I heal by holding on. His voice did not tremble. It simply carried weight. This morning when my car failed, I knew I would be late, he continued. I tried every trick I knew to start it. I keep that old vehicle because it's the same model we drove on base. The same engine rumble. The same sound when the door closes. A faint breath of a smile, the kind that hurts. When I finally got it running, I looked at the time. I was already behind. And I thought. He lifted his gaze, clear, resolute, wounded. They waited for me once. I will not make them wait again. And so, he had pressed down the accelerator. Not in recklessness, but in remembrance. Judge Caprio sat completely still. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he understood that some moments are too sacred for quick answers. The courtroom wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a holding place for grief, for memory, for honor that had never been acknowledged aloud. He slowly removed his glasses and set them on the bench. Colonel, he began, his voice lower than before, you have carried something that many men could not bear for a year, let alone 41. You have honored your fallen in a way that no law requires, no government demands, no nation can fully repay. Colonel Hale stood motionless. It is true, the judge continued, you ran that red light. And in any ordinary circumstance, I would issue a fine without hesitation. But today, his voice tightened just slightly. Today is not ordinary. And you are not an ordinary man. The courtroom was silent. Not the stillness of boredom, the stillness of reverence. Judge Caprio pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. Slowly. Deliberately. As though standing was itself an act of respect. He stepped down from the bench. Every eye followed him. He walked to where Colonel Hale stood, two men facing one another, both shaped by responsibility, both familiar with the weight of memory. Then, with quiet dignity, Judge Caprio placed his hand over his heart. And he saluted. Not a quick, ceremonial gesture. A long, measured, military salute, the kind that acknowledges sacrifice. Colonel Ailes posture straightened instinctively. He returned the salute, not as a formality, but as a final confirmation of the bond between the living and the fallen. Two men. One moment. 41 years of silence broken, without a single spoken apology. The room did not move at first. It was as if time itself had stepped aside to make space for the moment. Then, slowly, a woman seated in the second row raised her hand to her mouth, trying, and failing, to keep her composure. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. She didn't know Colonel Hale. She didn't know the names or the battle. But she knew what grief that endures looks like. A man near the back, a younger veteran still in his 30s, wearing a cap embroidered with the emblem of the Marine Corps, stood. He didn't speak. He simply stood at attention, spine straight, chin lifted. A silent salute from one soldier to another. One by one, others rose. Some were veterans. Some were family members of veterans. Some had simply lived through loss. No one had been asked to stand. No one had been prompted. Yet the entire courtroom rose as if connected by a single, unspoken truth. Sacrifice is not something that ends when the battle is over. A quiet sob broke the air, raw, human, unshielded. But there was no shame in it. Not today. The bailiff, normally rigid and expressionless, turned his face slightly away, blinking hard. Even the clerk, who had typed thousands of routine decisions, placed a hand over her heart. Colonel Hale remained saluting, his hand still to his brow, his gaze steady on Judge Caprio. The judge matched the gesture, holding it with the solemn precision of a son honoring not just one soldier, but all soldiers who never came home. It was no longer a courtroom. It was a memorial. When the salute finally lowered, no one sat back down right away. It was as if the room needed time to remember how to breathe, how to move, how to return to the ordinary world after witnessing something sacred. Judge Caprio cleared his throat, though his voice remained steady only through sheer will. Colonel Hale, he said, this citation is dismissed. No fine. No penalties. No record. The court recognizes that your actions were not careless. They were devoted. And devotion, especially the kind carried over a lifetime, is not something this court will punish. Colonel Hale stood silently, nodding once, not in triumph but in gratitude. But then the judge continued. Colonel, You shouldn't have to visit that memorial alone anymore. The colonel looked up, a flicker of surprise breaking through the years of discipline etched into his expression. If you will allow it, Judge Caprio said, I would like to accompany you next year. To stand beside you. To honor those men with you. The colonel did not speak. Words would have been too small. He simply nodded, and in that nod lived gratitude, relief, and something softer, permission to share the weight. After the hearing, the courtroom did not empty in the usual shuffle of rushed steps and quiet complaints. People remained. They approached the colonel one by one, not to question, not to praise, but simply to say, I remember someone too. My father served. My brother never came home. Thank you for carrying them. There are moments that change one life. And there are moments that change many. A year later, on the anniversary of the operation, the ritual did not happen with one man standing alone among gravestones. It happened with others beside him. Judge Caprio, veterans young and old, families who understood, strangers who felt compelled to come. No speeches. No ceremony. Just presence. And where once there was silence, there was now shared remembrance. The weight was still heavy. But it was no longer carried alone. Some stories aren't about punishment or guilt or judgment. Some stories remind us that the weight of service does not end when the uniform is folded and stored away. It continues in memory. In silence. In rituals kept when no one is watching. Colonel Hale carried his men for 41 years. And in one quiet courtroom, the world finally carried him back. If you believe that honor should be remembered, if you believe sacrifice should never fade, subscribe to Real Judge Stories. And comment your gratitude below. Some debts can't be repaid, but they can be remembered.